Hello and welcome to our show. Today we have a very special guest to Mnemonic Interval. Her name is Mrs. Virginia Weygandt, and she's the curator of the museum in Springfield, representing the County Historical Society. She's been there 5 years. Virginia graduated from Wittenberg University with a major in history, and right now she's been working at Rice State University on a master's in public history. We're very fortunate to have her. The Centerville Historical Commission has provided her internship here in Centerville, and she's been working with Lynn Russell, the administrator of Walton House Museum. She's done a great deal for the museum in the last few months. And so we're going to talk to her about our problems and the problems that they've had at the museum with heirlooms and artifacts. Virginia, I welcome you to our program.
Thank you,
We're delighted to have you. You gave a talk a couple weeks ago on problems with stuff. Now, we have a whole table of stuff here today.
Yes.
Maybe we could start our talk with some of this stuff. Just what do you do with certain problems, and can you tell me something about what they are?
Yes, first when an archivist or a curator looks at stuff, they have to understand that inherent in each type of material there are problems. Paper, for example, gets yellow with age, and especially newspaper tends to leave problems. I don't know if they can see it here, but there's a shadow where this particular piece of newspaper was, and the acid from the newspaper has marked or marred.
I can see that, yes.
Right. Then there are other problems with materials. The wood piece that's in front of you, the boot jack, has a crack right down the center of it.
Oh, yes, quite a long one.
Quite a long one, and it's because of the nature of the wood itself. And of course then we'll talk about some of the environmental problems that contribute to problems, but the wood itself has a tendency to crack.
All right.
And then we're going to look at a piece
of
our lovely toaster.
Oh, I love this old piece.
I do too. But being iron, of course, it tends to rust and corrode, and of course we've lost the bottom of the toaster right here because of corrosion.
Yeah, and this is a very old piece,
and
too.
It's a very old piece. But that's one of the problems inherent in metals is that they do tend to corrode.
Okay, that's one thing we're going to be talking about.
Right.
Problems with metal.
Right.
Now, you have something here you brought, and you told me not to take it out of the box because it would make a mess.
That's right, because one of the things, in fact, I'm going to put my gloves on, because curators and archivists work with gloves not only to keep clean, but to protect the artifacts. But this is one of the things that happens to leather when it begins to disintegrate. And in fact, you can see my gloves probably. They've gotten nice and red and yeah. That's something called red rot.
So and that's from leather?
The leather binding on this particular book has begun to deteriorate, and it's so high acid that what happens is it just begins to rot. And the rotting becomes quite a problem both for storage and even for handling.
I'll put this back in the bag, but this isn't where you would ever keep it.
No, it's not where you keep it, but for bringing it here, it was a good thing to do.
All right.
Then, of course, added to the problems that the materials have, there are environmental conditions which make storage and handling very difficult. And one of the things is humidity. In fact, when I was in classes, I said the three offenders are heat, humidity, and hands.
All right. I can control these.
Right. The heat and humidity, the problem is sometimes if the humidity is too high, like with photographs especially, photographic images are multi-layered. And especially in older photographs, there's at least 3 layers. There's a base, there's an emulsion, and there's an image. Each of them expand and contract at different rates depending on the heat and humidity. And one of the things that can happen is that this emulsion layer, which is very delicate, can sometimes crack and break, or it can rise and stick onto whatever is covering it, especially glass. Older photographs
that stick to the glass.
Yes, older photographs that are glass covered. One of the things you have to remember if you're going to take them out of the glass is to look at them first to see if there's any problems with the photograph sticking to it. So that's one problem.
Well, I know a lot of people keep their artifacts and heirlooms in attics.
Attics and basements are the worst places to keep artifacts. Most attics are usually too hot and they're much too dry.
Well, where should we keep them?
When I talk to groups and when I talk to the Antiques Study Group for the Historical Society, my recommendation has always been try to find a corner in a closet that is in your normal living area, because usually the temperature is fairly stable, the seasonal fluctuations aren't that big, and it's a place where there won't be that much dust or those kinds of problems.
If you have air conditioning, is that better?
It's a great help if you have air conditioning, because one of the problems that we have in an industrial society is that our air quality is not only bad for our lungs, but it's bad for our artifacts as well. Because the airborne particles that come in not only stick on to what we have, but they bring with them all kind of mold spores and fungus spores that get into paper, get onto artifacts, and especially textiles are at real risk when it comes to dirt. What happens is every time you have dirt and you have textiles, that dirt, which is abrasive, we think of dirt as being nice and round. If you look at it microscopically, it has small jagged edges. Those jagged edges sit inside the fibers and they begin to break them down.
Well, now I can see that this book has a problem.
That book has a problem. Before we go on to that, let's talk about other kinds of environmental problems. This is one of my, not my favorite because I don't like mice, but it's one of the best examples that there is. This is a piece of soap that Mrs. Russell has at the...
Antique soap.
Antique soap at the Historical Society, and it's been mouse munched. And this year, unfortunately, has been, I don't know whether you'd call it a good year for mice and a bad year for us, but plenty of friends that I've talked to say that the mouse population has decided that this year the winter's been too awful and the best place to be is in their house.
So there are more mice.
There are more mice
eating
inside.
Our heirlooms.
There are more mice inside this year because of the bad winter weather. And they will eat anything, as attested to by our little piece of soap. They like book bindings, they like soap, they love textiles. Anything they can eat or nest in becomes a real problem.
I know one of the best pictures we have at Walton House, the one in the living room, Jeremiah Watkins.
Yes.
The reason he's on such a small frame is because the mice ate all around his body. Yeah. So we had to put it in a smaller frame.
At the Clark County Historical Society, we have a lovely baptismal certificate that is mounted, and at one time it must have been folded because there's a mouse munch here and then one at the bottom. So that's a common problem. Hands are also a problem, and it's one of the reasons that archivists and curators wear gloves. The salts and oils and perspiration that are on your hands create quite a problem, especially if you're dealing with metals. Brass especially. If you touch brass with your bare hands, then you can often see exactly where you've touched, and it begins to set up a chemical process that will break down the metals.
I've seen that on photographs.
Yes.
Or negatives of photographs.
Yes, exactly. The same kind of problem. So when we work around the museum or around any archives, you'll find that gloves are the standard for the day.
Well, you have some other things there. What are those?
Yes, I brought cased photographs. A lot of people have beautiful cased photographs and heirlooms. One of the problems, we talked about heat and humidity. Light is also a problem. This is, and I'm afraid this is not going to come out well because it is a problem.
It's a picture of a man, I can see that.
This is a daguerreotype.
Daguerreotype?
It was the first photographic process, and it is one of the most durable of photographic processes. But unfortunately, one of the things that can happen is anytime this is exposed to the light, it will fade.
Oh.
Yeah. Hang on to that just a minute.
And you have another one
And I have another one. I wanted to bring a couple of them. The natural inclination with cased photographs is because we're all very curious. The natural inclination is to take it out of its case. And especially people think, oh, I want to get in there and I want to clean it and I want to make it look better. The problem is, let me show you a problem, what happens if you take it out of the case. And this is an ambrotype. That's lovely.
Is this called tintype?
No, that one's actually an ambrotype. This is an ambrotype as well that's been taken out of its case. And as you can see, because an ambrotype is a photographic image on glass, that is backed in black. What happens with it is that the black paint, which was what they covered the back,
came off.
Has come off. Now you can restore the image by putting it against something dark. If you even put something like this behind it.
Oh, amazing. It's
then
amazing, isn't it?
Then the image reappears.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, there are problems, and by taking it out of the case, we make it a lot more vulnerable to wear and tear.
Right.
Okay? See, then this way it looks a lot better.
Yeah, it's improved.
But see, unfortunately, because it's out of its case.
So people should not touch them.
Right. If they have a cased photograph, whether it's a daguerreotype, which is one of the oldest, an ambrotype, which is done on glass, or a tintype, which is tin, then it ought to stay cased if it's been cased in the first place.
I notice you're putting everything carefully back into certain envelopes.
Yes, this is a specially designed envelope that you can get from an archival supply house, and this is acid-free, which means that it's actually, acid-free is a bit of a misnomer. It's actually buffered with a 3% calcium carbonate solution.
The idea being that the paper won't add acid to anything put next to it.
Exactly. These artifacts have enough problems, both because of their own nature and because of the environmental conditions. We don't want to add any other problems to it, and that's one of the reasons for the acid-free.
All right, now we've seen quite a few problems. Have you got a few solutions?
Actually, we do, and this is a nice solution. This is something you can do with your textiles. This is a banner that was at the Centerville Historical Society that we found and needed some care. This has been rolled in acid-free paper, and this is a great way to store textiles by rolling them carefully.
Not folding.
Not folding. One of the problems that happens with folding, whether you're doing quilts or especially silks, something like that, every place that there is a fold, that's where the break occurs. And especially,
I have seen that.
Yeah, and especially with silks. Silks are very delicate. Now, silks you can stuff. If this were a silk dress, and I were going to put it in a box, I wouldn't roll a silk dress, but I would put it in a box. But what I'd do first is pad the sleeves.
Stuff it,
right? Exactly.
With acid-free paper.
With acid-free paper, right? Because what that'll do then is keep those folds, keep it from being folded and causing those breaks. But for a quilt or for a banner, this is a banner. This is a great way to store a textile and is very nicely done.
And they just tied it with a cotton.
This is cotton twill.
Just and again, cotton twill.
Right, we're not adding to the problem, so if we use cotton twill and acid-free paper, then the care is good and we're also not adding any problems.
I've heard it said that when you've stored things in your closet, you should bring them out once in a while, like a quilt, and rest it on the bed or put it back to rest.
If you have a quilt on your bed, which a lot of people do, they have an heirloom quilt, they put it on the bottom of their bed, which is where they want to display it. Some things you can do to take care of that quilt is, first of all, occasionally pick it up and refold it. Because one of the things that happens is any light that's coming through your window or that is there because of fluorescent lights or anything else is causing a lot of fading, which might not be obvious until you pick the quilt up and start dealing with it. So refold it. Expose a different part of it.
What about rolling a quilt? What about that?
You can roll a quilt. If you know you're going to store it for a while and you want to give it a rest, rolling is a great way to store it for a while and put it on the top shelf of a closet.
Well, now I have a quilt holder at home.
Actually that's a good place.
It doesn't fold it, but it also isn't rolled. I mean,
one of the things you want to watch with your quilt frame or quilt holder like that is that it could be getting very heavy and your edges could be beginning to sag.
That's true.
So every once in a while you might want to change its location and put it over a chair, put it on the edge of the bed so that the stress isn't as great on the bottom edges of that quilt because it's going to have a lot.
Because it wouldn't have the strength of the modern quilts because it's old.
That's right, and we get to get some downward drag on that.
Now you have a couple other things you were going to show us about remedying things.
Right. This is not so much a remedy because there wasn't really a problem with this particular artifact. This is a letter, and a very interesting one because it relates to Laura Nutt.
Laura Nutt.
Yes. And in fact, we just at the Center, I say we, but it's been such a nice experience at the Centerville Historical Society. I'm beginning to feel like it's mine.
Well, please feel it's home.
But we just got, do you want to look at the portrait?
Oh.
Yes, we just got a portrait.
You mean this letter relates to the portrait?
Yes, the letter relates to the portrait. This letter is a letter of condolence given or sent to Samuel Nutt on the death of Laura. And she's the young woman in the portrait.
Well, we're very interested in Laura Nutt because her piano is at Gerber House.
Yes.
A big square Steinway, beautiful piano.
I've seen it. It's lovely. It's lovely.
And she was the pianist, and we have her sheet music with her name on it.
Yes. Yes.
And so this is condolence. What happened to poor Laura?
Well, she died. The letter was written in 1877, so it was obviously. She died before October 22nd because this was a letter sent to Samuel Nutt as condolence. Other members of the family had just heard about her death and were writing to him saying how sorry they were at the news of her death.
That's wonderful that you found that in our collection.
Yes, it is a wonderful letter. And as I said, it doesn't really have a problem except for the split down the middle, and that's one of the reasons we decided to treat it in this manner.
Can I read just the first?
Sure.
It says, my dear cousin, a gloom is thrown over this beautiful morning of the sad news of the death of your beloved Laura.
Yeah,
I love the way they talked, old Victorian.
Yes, the language is beautiful.
Yeah.
But so that we don't lose the piece of this top piece, which has been split from the bottom, we did something called an encapsulation. This is done with a plastic that is mylar. It's an inert plastic.
Mylar.
Mylar. Most plastics that are that you find commercially, and especially photographic albums that have the little, rip zip kind of thing, that has a plastic that has polyvinyl chloride. And it's the polyvinyl chloride that will eat photographs and will eat documents.
Well, a lot of the photograph books that you buy in the store are not Mylar.
No,
so
they're
people
not.
Are risking their pictures.
They really are. In fact, that type of photographic album has two problems. One is the plastic itself. We'll get back to this in just a minute. One is the plastic, but also the glue that's on those photographic albums is very high acid.
Oh dear.
And so what you're doing to that poor photograph is putting it between acid and speeding the deterioration because it's both in the front and in the back of the photograph.
I'll have to go home and take mine out.
Right. And so one of the things, but this can be done to documents literally any size. I've done them to
documents, yeah.
Paper. I've done them to table size maps.
Oh really?
Yes,
that large?
That large and as small as receipts.
Okay, encapsulation.
Encapsulation. Most people are familiar with lamination. And the problems with lamination in the archival field is that it's very high heat and, again, very high acid because of the glue. And the same problems with the photographs, you're also doing the documents. You're putting glue on top of glue.
Now, this is somehow just glued at the edge?
Actually, what it is...
What is that you have there?
Right. This is a double-sided tape that's put out by 3M. And it, so that's the only, and this also has no acid. Even though it's an adhesive, has no acid. So the only place this document is sealed is, as you can tell, down the sides. So that the document itself, I haven't done anything to it. I haven't changed its nature chemically. I haven't altered it in any way. And if for some reason I really needed to get it out of here, then I could cut along the top and along the side between the plastic and the document and take it out.
Great.
It's not invasive. It hasn't hurt anything at all.
I noticed in this picture you had a little Willie nut. You have that in something.
Yes, this is another type of sleeve. This is also Mylar, except this is a photographic sleeve. It's opened on both ends.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So it's easy to take a photograph in or out. One of the reasons that archivists and curators like these is that it's easy to give this to a researcher and they can handle it, look at it, turn it over, see what's on the back, and still not harm it with hands, because hands do so much. Yeah, so it really does make it nice.
Well, now you have two pictures here the same. That
Yes.
shows Willie and his friends. Why are there two? What's the suggestion there?
There are two because there are plenty of times when someone might want to make a reproduction. For example, the one daguerreotype that we looked at, the image is beginning to fade. You can easily take those and have a reproduction photograph made and put the daguerreotype away for a while out of the light and put the reproduction on display. The Historical Society uses these because they want to use them in their education program or put them in their displays, and it's a lot less wear and tear on a reproduction than it would be if they mounted the original.
Very good idea.
Yeah, so it really is a preservation technique.
Plus, it's an excellent picture.
Yes. Yeah, it's a lot of fun as a picture.
All right, we have something else here.
Right.
And I have things like this at home. Do you want to tell us about this?
Right. This is a scrapbook.
There's a lot of stuff in there.
A lot of stuff in there. And it's very typical of the kinds of the kinds of albums you'll find not only nowadays, but from, you know, the 20s and 30s and everyone else. Some of the problems that there are, let's turn here first. These things have been stapled into...
Oh, yeah.
Now, the reason I brought something extra is you can tell what happens when staples have been on paper too long.
They rust.
They rust.
I see it.
Right there. That's what that brown stain is rust from a paper clip. And unfortunately, that will also happen to the things that are in here over time. If not right now, then eventually it will, because that's the nature of staples being metal, that they're going to end up rusting.
Now, this book is only, what, 33 years old or so?
Yes.
And all these wonderful newspaper clippings and things, we really should
Right. One of the things I wanted to point out, and it might not be that visible, there's a lot of things that have been taped, Scotch taped into here. One of the problems with Scotch tape is that sooner or later it gets brown. It discolors everything that's under it.
I've seen that.
Yes. And even if it flakes off, which this will do eventually, you'll never be able to get rid of the brown stain. Now, for newspapers, that's not so important. But sometimes there are photographs that have been
done the same thing,
and there will be a large stain.
What can we do with, do you want to show any more?
Yeah, I want to look at one more. We're going to look way at the back.
Okay.
We're going to keep on paging through here, because I want to look at photographs.
Okay.
Right.
This says 1976. I remember some of these.
Right. Actually, yeah, we'll look at that one in just a minute. There are a lot of things that are right about this. Is that first of all, they've got corners instead of being glued in here, and that's a real advantage.
That's an advantage.
That's a real advantage. The only thing that I would do with these is make sure they're labeled. There's no label on the front, and that, you know, there's no place that says what these are, and I would make sure that these get labeled.
How about writing on the back of a picture?
If you're going to write on the back of a picture, use a number 2 lead pencil, not a pen.
A lead pencil. All right.
Use a lead pencil on the back. But the only things that would help on this, or that would help preserve them a little longer, is to put some acid-free paper in between.
All right.
Now, if this were actually, if these newspaper clippings were loose, and oftentimes we get newspaper clippings that come in by themselves, then it's a good idea to Xerox them on acid-free paper, and that's one of the little tricks of the trade, is we have acid-free paper.
So we can copy them onto acid-free paper and keep them.
Right, and actually you destroy the original and keep it on the acid-free paper.
Okay.
Actually, that's the hardest thing for an archivist to do, is throw something away. But you throw away your newspaper.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What is this?
Now that's what the Mylar looks like. It comes in tubes. And so, in fact, it usually comes, I get them in 250 yards long and 36 inches wide. So that's why you can do about anything you want.
How about all these things over here?
Lots of things that we use, tricks of the trade. This is a nice soft brush. It's good for 2 things. One is to clean photographs.
Right, just brush off.
Just brush, and anytime, a good technique for brushing anything is to start in the middle and go to the sides. And that's the way you clean, whether it's documents or photographs or anything else. It's a lot gentler that way to clean. And we have things like how to clean dirty documents. And some of them are just a good old art gum. Will work very well.
In documents?
On documents. And you'd be surprised the
What,
amount
to
of
take
grime.
dirt off?
To
grime?
take dirt off and grime, you'd be surprised how much can come. Now, you're not going to get the yellow off because that's age. But you can get dirt off, and you can get grime off, and that helps a whole lot. Then some of them are things like plastic paper clips instead of metal paper clips so they don't rust.
I can see that. Very
It's,
practical.
very practical. Some of them are a little more specialized testing kits to see the pH level of papers to see whether you can use them or
Now,
not.
explain that to me. That looks kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting, and it's very easy to use. It's just a pen that looks like this, and what you do is just test the corner of paper, and it tells you in the directions depending on what color that turns. Then you'll know approximately the pH level and whether it's actually acid-free or not. This is good because
Tells you then whether you need to treat it special?
Well, what it does is also tells you whether you can actually use it in your archives. And I found out that something that I had been using I shouldn't have been.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So it's very useful. It's one of those things that you have to keep.
And I can recognize labels.
Right, labels. But these are also acid-free labels.
Oh.
So that when we put them
This
on
is
boxes.
all highly specialized stuff, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is. And these supplies are available at the Walton House. If someone needs archival supplies, they want to take care of their family heirlooms, they want photographic sleeves for their photographs, or if they want us to do an encapsulation. While I'm here, I've done some encapsulations for other people. That's something we can do, but they can get the supplies at the Walton House.
All right, I have a box here.
Right.
Can you, just for our last thing here,
Yes, it's heavy.
I need help. Here, thanks.
All right.
Okay. Now, I know Lynn Russell has a lot of these around, and I know you were working in this. This has something to what you've been doing the last couple months.
Yes, exactly. My internship project has been to start or to set up your documents in an archival manner. So I'm creating your archives. And what we're trying to do in the normal parlance, computer parlance, is we're trying to make your documents user-friendly, not only for your staff but for your volunteers. And that means setting up the documents first in acid-free file folders, Xeroxing newspaper clippings, all those things that are going to protect the documents, then setting them up in series and doing at the end what's called a finding aid. So if someone comes in and says, well, what is there in this collection, then they can find out.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so impressed at all these things you've done. I know Lynn has really appreciated it. And I want to thank you for coming. You've really told me a lot of things that I'm going to run right home and do something about. And I hope the rest of our viewers appreciate this help too.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming.